Hi, it's Bumble. Welcome back to my channel. So, this is going to get posted the same day as my Sense and Sensibility book review, but in terms of timing between the book and the movie, I actually watched the movie um, like 2 days after I did the review on the the book. I feel kind of bad. I only had read the book last week, and that reading it took up the majority of my week long trip. And there was apparently a lot of dialogue and some details I'd forgotten about already, because I had started reading it at like the beginning of my trip, and everything just kind of came rushing back, and my reactions to things as I was watching the movie. So some of my notes, a lot of them are like, oh, I forgot about this thing and my opinion on this thing. It's because I really did forget from the book. But it was kind of cool watching this since I had like just read the book that a lot of the dialogue, or it felt like most of it, um, was pretty much the same. So it was really cool for me watching, and I'm like, wait, I know this line. I remember this scene. Because I don't really watch a lot of like movies that are based on books too much, and usually it ends up being that I'll like either watch the movie first and then read the book, or sometimes I just watch the movie. So this is one of those like rare times for me when I sort of didn't like, I guess you could call it the proper order of like reading the book first and then the movie. But there was some things I didn't remember from the book that I'm assuming were new for this movie, because there's another Sense and Sensibility movie from 2008. I'm not going to watch that, but this is just a review of the 1995 one with Kate Winslet and Emma Thompson, who play the Dashwood sisters. I thought they did really well, actually. There was actually a ton of actors in here that I recognized from like other things, and for pretty much a lot of the main characters, except for the actor for Willoughby, I didn't recognize him for stuff. Like they even have what's his name, Hugh Laurie. I just know him as like the guy that plays House. He plays one of the minor characters. I didn't expect him to see him in this. I actually kind of forgot that he was British anyway. Um, and then they have Hugh Grant playing Edward, which I feel like fits pretty well. I've seen like a couple of like movies he's in, usually rom-coms. He's in like a lot of rom-coms from like the 90s and early 2000s, and Edward's like a very awkward character. He's one of the characters I really liked from the book actually, but isn't in it much except mostly at the beginning. But I thought he fit pretty well for that. It's just funny because I barely ever seen him like this young in anything, and he just seems so awkward compared to everyone else. But I feel like that's part of his character. I have notes about that somewhere. And then Alan Rickman, I've seen him in a couple of things. I mostly always just think of Harry Potter and the first Die Hard movie. I know there's at least one other movie. Oh, what is it called? It's the one about the barber. Um, it's the horror musical. Why am I blanking? Sweeney Todd. Yeah, yeah, he's in the Sweeney Todd movie from the early 2000s. But I've never seen him in a movie where it's like a romance movie or him playing a romantic lead. So that was actually pretty cool. It just feels kind of weird because I think he was like, I looked it up, like 50 at the time of this movie, but he's playing a character that's 35. I mean, I know the whole thing is like Brandon's supposed to be a character that's like older than Marianne and Eleanor and Willoughby and like pretty much all the other like main characters and stuff, but I wouldn't have even guessed that he was 50. He looks pretty good for 50 in this, unless what I had read was wrong. I don't know. I mean, he's playing a 35. Not that he looks 35, but it still sort of fits. But yeah, let me go in my notes. I'm not sure if I'm actually going to read everything I have written down, because a lot of it was like, oh, I kind of remember this thing and this thing. But they have this new thing where the Dashwoods just have a tree house. I thought that was pretty cool. I definitely, I was like, I don't remember this from the book. I don't think that was in there. One of the things I really liked with this movie adaptation is I feel like you get to see more of Margaret. Because I was saying in my book review, you don't really get to see her much. She's kind of just mentioned and then gone for a lot of the story. I think because it's when Marianne and Eleanor, they go to London and they stay with Mrs. Jennings, and they stay with like multiple people throughout the story, and I kind of get it mixed up in my head of like which family, which like couple they're staying with, but they end up separated from their mom, um, and that's like a big chunk of the story, and Margaret's just not mentioned in there at all. But she's in a lot of this, and especially at the beginning, it was actually cool to get to see her. I always thought she was like in her early teens. She's kind of younger than I expected. I think she says that she's like 11 or something, except she sounds like she's like 8 or whatever. It was kind of confusing to me with the book, because there's like a 2 to 3 in like the ending of the book, like a 2 to 3 year like gap or something of like when Marianne ends up getting married. It's like a little flash forward sort of thing. And I remember it says something of like Margaret being old enough to date, so I thought she was like 15 and then maybe like 17 by the end, but she's actually just 11. And you get to see like a lot more of her character, where she's just like this younger sister type of character. I mean, I know that's not a personality trait, but I like that you get to see both Marianne and Eleanor sort of like, they're her older sisters. They're kind of mothering her a little bit in a sense. She's like a bit of a rascal. She ends up kind of becoming friends with Edward, which I thought was cool. And I like that because she's really shy, she ends up being hidden for part of the beginning of the movie, where she's like in characters are talking to her, but you don't actually get to see her on screen, where she'll be like under a table or in a tree house. And it was kind of funny because she had like way more of a presence in this movie, I felt like, than in the book. So I'm glad she actually felt like a character here. And then she's reunited with her sisters at the end. I mean, that's the same as the book as well. I liked the scene in this one where Margaret is hiding under a table, and Eleanor has been trying to get her to come out, and then Edward shows up and is kind of playing along with. Margaret's like under a table with the world atlas, so Eleanor and Edward are pretending like they don't know. I think it's oh gosh, I can't remember. They're trying to pretend they don't know where the location of something is, so that way she would try to help them and to get her to come out of the table. That was kind of a funny scene. Um, I felt like the dialogue in this was easier for me to understand than when I had watched the 2005 Pride and Prejudice movie. But I also haven't seen that in a while, and I still need to read the book as well. I don't know when I'm going to get around to that, because I was thinking of doing Treasure Island next, but I'm also going to be away from my house for like a week or so soon, so but Pride and Prejudice, the book for that is definitely like on my list. I think one of the things I'd forgotten about from the book was like characters' relations to each other. Like I remember the character Fanny. I remember that I didn't like her. I still didn't like her here. Because it's like the way she's sort of snooty about people that have less money than her, and that kind of seems to be her motivation of her opinions of like who should get married and who shouldn't get married. Like she sounded kind of happy about Lucy, you know, no, about saying something of like, oh, Edward shouldn't marry Eleanor because he doesn't have any money, but then she ends up getting really pissed finding out that Lucy has been engaged to Edward for the past 5 years. At least to like a funny scene where she's like yelling at her and trying to throw her out of her house. But yeah, I forgot that Fanny was actually Edward's sister. Um, but yeah, I don't really like her as a character, so I'm probably not going to talk about her much. Um, the music in this is pretty nice. Not just like the instrument. I will say I like a lot of the instrumental music in like period dramas. I usually tend to look up their soundtracks as I'm watching the movie. But you also get to hear Marianne's music as well because she plays the pianoforte. But she also sings. I couldn't remember not if she sang in the book. I remember there was at least I think like one song in there. But I noticed for like the beginning of the movie, especially she ends up playing a lot of really sad music, and then once she ends up meeting um, Colonel Brandon. Oh yeah, I think I made a mistake with that with my book with the when I was talking about the book. I kept calling him Colonial, but it's Colonel. It's just the way it's spelled. I was even looking at the subtitles when I was watching the movie. You know, because Colonel does have an L in it, but it's just like the way the word is spelled made me think that it was pronounced differently, but it is Colonel Brandon. I kept saying like Colonial Brandon or something, and it's like that's not even how that word's spelled. So I have to apologize about that. Yeah, Colonel Brandon, that's his title, but you know it's easier to just refer to him as Brandon. But anyway, it's once he ends up meeting Marion that I noticed she ends up playing more like happy and uplifting music. Actually, the first time they meet each other in this, it's that she's singing to a group and he walks in and can I just say that yeah, Kate Winslet. I was trying to remember her name and I had to like squint at the poster. I mostly just remember her from like Titanic. I know she's been in other stuff. She has a really pretty voice. There's like a couple of times where Marianne, I think like at least two times in the movie where she sings, and I mean I'm assuming that's her voice and she's not like dubbed over. Her voice sounds really pretty. I just wanted to comment on that. I like the scenes of Eleanor and Edward together at the beginning. They're like spending time um, together and you know you can tell like they like each other, so then it makes it kind of sad when Edward, not just that you find out that he's been engaged to Lucy the whole time, but also that he ends up leaving and he's gone for most of the story, and Eleanor gets really sad about that. Though I did just finish the movie like a couple minutes ago, and I had forgotten that he tells her like, yeah, I thought that like once he's not engaged to Lucy anymore and he does admit that he loves Eleanor, where he tells her like, yeah, I thought, you know, back then when we first met each other that you only viewed me as a friend, so I was the only one that was suffering in our friendship. And I was like, wait, what? Dude, she loved you. But I always like him as a character. He just wants to have like a simple life and doesn't really care about like his mom's wishes for him to like advance more in society or anything. Um, you know, I will say, what was nice was watching this as a movie compared, you know, like you can see the characters' faces and everything, you know, because it's the actors and stuff. I really liked the performances for the two Dashwood sisters, and really getting to hear the emotion in the characters' voices kind of just made a lot of the lines stronger or kind of hit more, or like being able to see the characters' facial expressions. Like Eleanor gets really flustered when Marianne once is talking about like wanting her to marry Edward, and then Marianne makes fun of Eleanor of saying like it's this one line of like, oh, what do you mean you only just like him or whatever. Like Marianne wants people to use stronger language and be kind of like her about what's that phrase of like wearing your heart on your sleeve, of like really showing your emotions, and Eleanor is someone that's like a bit more kind of shy and composed compared to Marianne. But yeah, it's great to like hear their voices and stuff. Um, uh, I felt like Mrs. Jennings as a character, like her being like a chatty older woman, she looked pretty much exactly how I expected. You know, I mean, I know that books will have like descriptions of characters, but then you'll watch a movie and you get to see them in like the full costumes and everything. I feel like that really makes it. Same with Mrs. Dashwood. Actually, I feel like you don't you see like less of her in this. I think I was just focused on it. There's a scene I really liked in the book where she's talking to Eleanor and saying how like Brandon told her that he loves Marianne, and then later like they get married. Her Brandon and Marianne get married and stuff, and it was kind of the thing for me in the book of like showing like, yeah, he's gonna probably propose to her or something, and Mrs. Dashwood gives this whole little speech, and that scene is like completely just cut, like not there, and I was really sad. Actually, I have issues with the ending of this movie, that it feels very rushed. But I'll get to that in a bit. Uh, Sorry, I have to scroll through some of my notes because it was stuff that I already talked about earlier. Um, let's see. There's a whole thing with Mrs. Jennings where she keeps forcing people to play music when they don't want to play music, and the characters theorize that she's just doing it because she's bored and she kind of enjoys torment. I kind of felt like secondhand embarrassment. She would ask Marianne, like, you need to sing, or to Eleanor as well, or Brandon, and like a bunch of characters to like, you need to just start playing music, and it's like none of these people want to. Um, and then the scene when Marianne, because I remembered that she meets Brandon like pretty early on, and he's kind of immediately in love with her, but tells Eleanor like, yeah, Marianne probably thinks I'm like too old for her. Like, doesn't even view himself um as someone that Marianne would be interested in. He's like sad about it. I kind of felt bad for Brandon during this. There's like a certain um so I have a certain little paragraph about that. I'll get to that in a minute actually. I want to talk about the scene when Marianne meets Willoughby. Like I already had seen it as like really romantic. When they meet in the book, and because she fall. I mean, it's the same here. She falls when she's like going on her walk, and Willoughby is happened to pass by and carries her home. And I thought when I was originally reading, like, yeah, that's really romantic. Though in this, I guess Margaret is there too. She almost gets run over by his horse. But it feels like even kind of more romantic here, where you actually get to see that it's in the rain, and he's kind of further away and looks almost like a shadowy figure on his horse, sort of this like mysterious stranger. It's like a very kind of romantic first meeting, and I liked it even more here. Really just getting to see all the visuals of it and everything. I don't remember in the book if it said if it was like raining or something in that scene, but I think getting to see it in the rain here was pretty cool. I feel like it's hard for me watching the movie, not just because I just read the book, but knowing what's gonna happen if like a lot of the characters end up sad about the people they're in love with. I think that's part of the reason I prefer, and I know I haven't read the book for it yet and only have seen like one of the movies, but part of the reason I prefer Pride and Prejudice, it feels a little bit happier in a way. We'll see if I still feel that way when I kind of reacquaint myself with it. But yeah, you have this like scene with Marianne meeting Willoughby, and it's like very romantic. And I was thinking like, damn, I know I'm gonna hate him later when he's gonna not be nice to her, and how she's gonna get sad over him. Like knowing all of that of like, oh, this is the. There was several times in the movie where I'm like, oh, this is the moment we're gonna go through your heartbreak, so and so, and it's, mm, um, like you get to see Willoughby hanging out with Marianne, um, and watching the two of them together and Marianne looks so happy is really sweet. And then Eleanor watching them look so sad. Like there's this part when Willoughby picks up Marianne and spins her around, and that was cute. And you know what? If I was Marianne, I would have just assumed that he was in love with me too. And then you find out later that I mean, he ends up being a really bad person, and the characters think like, yeah, he probably was in love with Marianne. I always felt like it was kind of iffy, um, but it's funny. I was rooting for Willoughby and Marianne when I was originally reading the book. Before you like really learn some stuff about him of how he's treated other characters, and then I thought like, oh, Brandon seems like he's too old for Marianne. Like I didn't want them to end up together, and I wanted him to end up with Eleanor because it felt like they kind of had more in common. Um, and then watching the movie and knowing everything from like reading the book, it was kind of the opposite this time, where I was rooting for Brandon, and I didn't want Willoughby around Marianne. Um, Let me see. I have like so many notes. I'm skipping through a lot of them actually. I never noticed it before, but Willoughby is kind of a bad influence on Marianne. She kind of becomes more rude. And then there's this whole bit where Willoughby's saying that he doesn't like Brandon. I forgot about that, but that kind of felt like a little bit of a red flag. Um, then And then the part when Marianne, she writes these letters to Willoughby and he doesn't respond, and then they see each other at a party and they hadn't seen each other in a while, and he acts really cold to her, and she's like, "Hey, you didn't respond to my letters. It's nice seeing you. Why didn't you reach out to me?" It's kind of the same thing of like reading someone like with their text messages, leaving them unread. It's kind of like the same thing. Um, but getting to actually see this scene in more of a visual format, like as a movie, it just felt so much worse. Where it's like the whole time she's talking to Willoughby, Marianne, I mean, he's trying not to make eye contact with her because he's trying not to lie of like why he hasn't been seeing her. And then I think her name's Miss Gray. Wait, was it Miss Gray? No, I think that's the person Edward ends up with for a while. I'm trying to remember. No, but the woman that Willoughby is with at the party, like literally, kind of sizes up Marianne and kind of, when you like look up and down at with someone with your eyes, and then she makes a comment to Willoughby of like about Eleanor and Marianne, being like poor and showing up in their like quote unquote country clothes, even though I thought their outfits looked pretty. Um, And then I feel like I noticed there was like a lot more gossip in this of like people calling Eleanor a spinster behind her back. Um, and then you learn a bunch of stuff about Willoughby of him like um, getting Beth pregnant. I completely forgot about Beth actually. I remembered um, about Eliza, who I think was like um, Brandon's ward. But there's this whole thing where she ends up getting pregnant. She has this baby named Beth that Brandon promises to like kind of look after a bit, and then, or more like to keep an eye on her. And then Beth ends up getting pregnant, and it turns out the person who gets her pregnant is Willoughby. But yeah, he just straight up abandons her, and she has to like raise the baby alone. And then because of that, he ends up losing his money, um, and then abandons Marianne just so he could marry someone with money so he can pay back like all the money he owns, or not owns, owes. But then it's interesting, like Brandon's talking about like how terrible of a person Willoughby is, and then says to Eleanor, probably is like sort of a way to not stress her out too much of that Willoughby probably would have married Marianne if he like didn't need money, which maybe. I mean, you see at the end with this that he's like on his horse and seeing that she's getting married, and then kind of just rides, like kind of probably wishing he could have married her, but I don't know. There's a lot of scenes in this where Eleanor is trying to comfort Marianne. It feels very like soft and sweet. I really like the lighting in this movie too, where the characters, they're at night and they're having to use candlelight, and it just, I always think candles in movies anyway, it just, not that the only light in the room is a candle, but sometimes there's like a bit more light. I don't really know how to describe it. But the lighting in some of those scenes feels very kind of soft and gentle. I really liked that. Really set the mood. Um, there's this part where Eleanor and Edward, where she gets to see him again. I think it's when she's finding out that he's been engaged the past 5 years or something, and they're having this really serious conversation. I thought that part was really well acted actually, and he tells her, "Your friendship has been," and this is I think back when he's still thinking that she only sees them as like friends or something, and that's not true. She's been in love with him the whole time, and he says, "Your friendship has been the most important of my life." And she just kind of quietly says like, "You'll always have it," and you see she's getting a little bit emotional. I felt so bad for her, and then she has to deal with the whole thing of like Marianne being sick, and actually seeing Eleanor cry talking to Marianne's like asleep or something, and Eleanor is so sad about her being sick, like made me kind of sad actually. Um, but then she ends up getting better, and that's when she's kind of finally like spent like there are scenes where she's with Brandon. Like there's one early on where they're um I think doing work in some field, and he's like helping her a little bit, and they do get to talk a little bit, but that's the other thing, is it still doesn't really feel like they spend much time. Like the fact that they end up like getting married and I guess in love by the end, I still just don't really buy their romance, honestly. Like they it seems like they finally start spending time together only after like Marianne gets sick and she's recovering. And then I'm like, okay, they probably could have fallen in love at that point, but and I get that Marianne's with Willoughby through a lot of the story, and the entire time Brandon's in love with her, but I just wish they had more time, or I guess more time together, but also I wish we could have seen it in either like the book or the movie as like the audience of more of them together. I just still don't really find their romance believable. Though I will say, I never realized how relaxing Alan Rickman's voice is until the part when he's like reading to Marianne when she's like in her recovery. It's very gentle. And then you get the whole bit where you find out that Lucy ends up actually marrying Edward's brother Robert instead of Edward. I still feel like that kind of just comes out of nowhere, no matter if it's the movie or the book. And even though I knew that it was, going to happen, I feel like it just kind of happens just so that Eleanor is able to marry him, which I'm so glad she's able to marry Edward, and not that she like I know is what I was saying of like wanting her to kind of get with Brandon during part of the story, but I'm glad that Eleanor ends up with Edward, because she ends up sad about him for like a lot of the story, and I do think that they were good together. Um, but it does feel kind of random of like Lucy's engaged to Edward for like 5 years, and then she ends up falling in love with his brother like really fast, and then they just get married, and that's that, and then Edward's single again. It's just like, what? Um, but I was excited to see the part when Eleanor's being told all this information, and she just bursts into tears on the spot, and then it kind of transitions into a smile, but she's still kind of crying a little bit of knowing that she can marry Edward, like he's single, but also he's saying about how I really like the line when he's saying that he does love her. Like he starts by saying like, yeah, I thought, or no, the friendship line was earlier. He thought that they were only friends or something, but he says, oh gosh, I wish I had written it down. Something of like, my heart belongs to you now. It's something like that line, but it's delivered in like a really sweet way. And then it's I feel like the ending after that is like really rushed to me, where it goes Eleanor learning that she can marry Edward, and then it goes to the next scene where he's proposing to her without us seeing, where it's just like Marianne talking about it. And then Margaret goes into a treehouse, and her and Marianne are like eavesdropping or something. And then the next scene is Marianne and Brandon getting married. Like you don't even see him ask her or anything, and they, like I said, they don't have the scene of the mom telling Eleanor of like how Brandon's in love with Marianne. It just feels like it comes out of nowhere, because you don't get I mean, you do see Brandon hang out with Marianne a little bit, but you don't actually get like any kind of like romantic confession scene with them, and then it's like suddenly they're getting married. If anything, I would have thought it would end with like Eleanor and Edward getting married, because you just had a scene of him like kind of off screen like proposing to her. So I thought it would have ended with that. Especially I remember with the book where it's like Edward and Eleanor, it's like sometime later too, they get married, and then they hope that Marianne and Brandon would get married, and then they finally do get married, and it ends there. So having Edward and why do I keep saying Edward? no, Marianne and Brandon getting married first and just kind of out of nowhere. It just felt really weird to me, and just kind of very rushed. I wasn't even sure if it was like I could tell that it was Marianne and Brandon's marriage specifically because she's in a wedding dress. I wasn't sure if it was like a double wedding or if Edward and Eleanor had already gotten married because they're also at the wedding, but they're not wearing wedding clothes. He just kisses her hand. It just felt like I know it needs to end in a happy ending, and it's already like a 2 hour movie or something like that. I'm not sure on that number. So it's like, okay, we need to show the happy ending of like everyone does end up together. But it just made it feel kind of confusing and just very sudden. I didn't really like that, and I was kind of bummed because I liked like pretty much everything else with the movie, and that a lot of the dialogue is the same and stuff, but the ending just kind of bothered me in that way. I do like that the story does end up with a happy ending. I was really happy about that when I read the book originally, because a lot of it is just either like Marianne or Eleanor or both of them going through like this heartache or getting sick or all these bad things happening to them. So it's nice at the end that they do end up with people that love them, and they both end up getting married, and it's really sweet. Um, but yeah, here it just that ending felt really rushed and kind of ruined it a little for me. But I still liked the movie. I thought all the actors did a good job. I liked the soundtrack. I will be listening to that. I think I already saved it as a playlist on Spotify. But like I said, I always really like the music for period dramas. Not for like all of them, but with these kind of like romantic ones, it's usually stuff that's like kind of very chill, very gentle. But yeah, this was good. I'm glad I watched it. I'm glad that I watched it like as close as I could to finishing the book. That was really nice. I don't know if I'd watch it again, but yeah, the next Jane Austen thing for me would probably be Pride and Prejudice. I think I ended up buying the movie. I'm trying to remember. I think I bought it. I found it at like a Goodwill or something. So I have access to it. But I think it's also like on streaming anyway. And I do want the excuse to kind of rewatch it again, but I also really need to read the book. I know that the book, it's shorter, Pride and Prejudice, than Sense and Sensibility, because I got to like, look at both when I was on my cruise. I just didn't get to finish reading Pride and Prejudice. But yeah, I don't know when I'll get around to that. Hopefully soon. It's like I am so tempted to start it, but it's also like in a week I'm gonna be. I mean, I could just read it at my aunt's house too, but I have other things planned. So I'm thinking I might just start it when I get back and kind of just take my time with it. But the chapters in it, from what I remember, are like super short. And then I'll talk about it, and then I'll have the excuse to watch. I don't remember if I've done a video on the movie, but even if I have, I'll probably make a video on it again, because it'll be like, okay, I watched the book, watched one of the movies, let's talk about it. But then there's also that 1995 TV series on Hulu, which I've heard is also really good, but it just looks really long. I don't know. Maybe, probably not, but maybe I'd check out like an episode of it or something. We'll see. But then again, there's like a Jane Eyre TV series I also want to check out that's probably just as long, and I'm gonna make the excuse for that. So, all right. Well, thanks for watching. Bye bye.